For more than 150 years, the southern flank of the Colosseum showed the world a geometry that was not its own. Today, Italian design has corrected that silence.
I mean, that quote just sets the stage perfectly, doesn't it?
It really does. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we are looking at something that, well, it completely redefines how we interact with ancient ruins.
Absolutely. Because you might think you know what the Colosseum looks like. You've seen the postcards, the travel blogs.
You've probably even taken a selfie right in front of that iconic, swooping, half-destroyed outer wall.
Right, but what if we told you that the ground you're looking at in those pictures, the very foundation framing the entire side of the monument, is actually a complete architectural lie?
It's wild to think about. We're unpacking a massive, truly paradigm-shifting intervention right in the historic center of Rome, inside a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
And this project, which was officially inaugurated on March 17th, 2026, it completely changes the game.
We have an incredible stack of sources guiding us today, too. We're pulling from the official March 2026 press release from the Parco Archeologico del Colosseo, which we'll just call Parco.
Yeah, that's much easier to say.
Definitely. We also have a highly detailed technical project sheet from Stefano Boeri Interiors, the architectural firm behind the design.
And to really make sense of the underlying philosophy here, we're relying heavily on this brilliant analytical review by Simona Cochi.
Right, for the Italian Way, which is an editorial project championing Italy's national digital heritage.
Between these three documents, our mission today is to figure out how modern design can fix a broken monument without resorting to, fake history.
Because honoring an architectural arc that stretches all the way from 79 CE to the present day is, well, it's a highly delicate balancing act.
It really is.
So think about the last time you looked at a famous historical ruin. Did you ever feel like you just weren't getting the full picture, like something crucial was missing from the physical footprint?
To understand the brilliance of what was just completed in 2026, we actually have to start by uncovering a 150-year-old cover-up.
Yeah, let's talk about the lie of the Colosseum. Why does it look the way it does?
Well, the northern side of the Colosseum is towering and relatively intact, right? And that's because it was built on a very solid, compact geological substrate.
But the southern flank is a different story.
Exactly. The southern flank, the part with that famous swooping gap, was built on highly unstable alluvial soil. So over the centuries, Rome experienced these massive natural settling events and violent earthquakes.
Right.
That southern half was incredibly vulnerable, which led to progressive, catastrophic collapses over time.
But, the earthquakes only put the stone on the ground. The real reason the pillars vanished comes down to human opportunism in the medieval era.
Oh, yeah, rampant spoliation.
Which is essentially a very polite academic term for industrial-scale scavenging.
It totally is. I mean, imagine you're a medieval Roman builder, right? You need to construct a palace or a stable or just a boundary wall.
Going out to the mountains to quarry fresh stone is expensive and dangerous.
Exactly. Meanwhile, sitting right in the middle of your city is the Colosseum, and its collapsed southern flank is basically acting like a giant, unattended hardware store.
Just free premium materials sitting there?
Right. So the locals systematically scavenged these massive, perfectly cut travertine blocks, some of them 90 centimeters thick.
Ah.
They carted them away piece by piece until the 50-meter-tall pillars and vaulted corridors on the south side simply vanished into the fabric of the surrounding city.
And ironically, that created that romantic sort of half-missing aesthetic that Renaissance painters obsessed over later on.
Yeah, but fast forward to the 19th century, and the area around that missing flank was just a messy, dangerous, uneven mix of dirt and rubble.
And this is where the historical lie actually begins. In the 1800s, two restorers named Raphael Stern and Giuseppe Valadier were tasked with cleaning up the site.
They were operating during the era of the Grand Tour. Wealthy Europeans were flocking to Rome to see these romantic ruins.
And Stern and Valadier, they didn't have modern archaeological technology.
No, not at all. Their primary goal was simply to make the area accessible and visually tidy for these early tourists.
So rather than meticulously excavating all that rubble to find the original ancient floor, they took the easy way out.
They really did. They leveled the entire area by laying down a thick layer of dirt and then paving it over with sandpitrini, which are those classic Roman cobblestones.
But here's the kicker. They laid those cobblestones roughly a full meter above the original Roman floor level.
And a full meter is an absolute eternity in architectural terms.
Right. By artificially raising the ground, Stern and Valadier completely buried the monument's crepidine.
Let's explain that term for a second because it's crucial.
Yeah, please do.
The crepidine is the double-stepped base of the monument. It's the architectural foundation that clearly defines the boundary between the public square outside and the sacred space of the amphitheater inside.
It establishes the building's true vertical proportions.
Exactly. When you bury that stepped base under a meter of cobblestones, you literally sever the monument from its geometric truth.
The analogy that came to mind when I was reading through the sources was, imagine walking into a grand, beautifully proportioned Victorian house.
Okay.
The architect designed it with soaring ceilings and towering doors to make you feel a specific sense of awe. But imagine someone has secretly raised the floor levels so high that you are walking around at the height of the original doorknobs.
Oh, that's a great way to picture it.
Right. Sure, you are still inside the house, but the proportions are completely ruined. The majesty is stunted.
Yeah, it throws off the entire spatial awareness.
And for over 150 years, millions of tourists and brilliant scholars were walking on this false ground, looking at a squashed, distorted Colosseum, completely unaware that the real foundation was buried 3 feet beneath their shoes.
It's crazy, and correcting a century-and-a-half-old mistake like that requires an immense amount of modern firepower.
It's not just a matter of digging up some cobblestones.
Not at all. It's about managing the structural integrity of a highly fragile ancient ruin while you expose foundations that haven't seen the sun since the 1800s.
Which brings us to the who, what, and when of uncovering the truth. The archaeological campaigns ran between 2021 and 2024.
Right.
The team at Parco systematically dug down through that 19th century paving, down through layers of medieval dirt, and finally documented the true original Roman floor level.
Which sits exactly at 23 meters above sea level.
But finding that true floor level at 23 meters, while it was a triumph, it immediately presented a huge new problem.
Yeah, because once they exposed this massive uneven footprint of ancient rubble, they had to figure out how to stabilize it. And more than that, how to integrate it into the modern city without the modern materials actively destroying the ancient stone.
To tackle that, they assembled an absolute dream team. The project was directed by Alfonsina Russo at Parco, working alongside archaeologists Federico Rinaldi and Barbara Nazzaro.
And for the spatial reintegration of the southern ambulatories, they brought in Stefano Boeri Interiors, specifically architects Stefano Boeri and Giorgio Dona.
And funding a massive public works project in the middle of Rome's historic center is notoriously difficult. But the financial mechanism here is fascinating.
It really is. The project was fueled by a €4 million grant from CIPE, acting as compensation funds related to the construction of Rome's Metro C subway line.
I just love that irony so much. The massive disruption of digging a modern 21st century subway system directly funded the restoration of a first-century amphitheater.
It's a perfect Roman paradox. But even with the funding and the top architectural minds, the actual physical chemistry of the restoration was a massive hurdle.
Right, because modern construction materials are incredibly hostile to ancient ruins.
Exactly. Standard modern cement contains soluble salts. When you apply it to ancient porous stone like travertine, water carries those salts deep into the microscopic pores of the rock.
And that's where the damage happens.
Yeah, when the water evaporates, the salts crystallize and expand, literally blowing the ancient stone apart from the inside out.
So to solve this, the design team partnered with MAPE as their techno-partner. MAPE developed these specialized, entirely cement-free lime materials specifically formulated for the Colosseum's unique microclimate.
But they pushed the boundaries of material science even further with a product called Nanolique, which they developed alongside the University of L'Aquila.
Nanolique is such a perfect example of modern science serving ancient history.
It's incredible tech. It's basically an emulsion of lime nanoparticles suspended in water.
Because the lime particles are shrunk down to a microscopic scale, they can slip deeply into the natural pores and microcracks of the weakened ancient travertine,
Right, and once they're inside, they react with the carbon dioxide in the air to form solid calcium carbonate.
which is the exact same mineral the ancient stone is made of.
Exactly. It consolidates and strengthens the ruin on a microscopic level without introducing a single harmful modern chemical.
It's essentially using nanotechnology to help the ancient rock heal itself.
It's brilliant.
But, reading through these highly technical methods brings up a very obvious question for me.
Okay, what's that?
Well, they found the original floor level. They had 4 million euros in funding. They had brilliant architects and cutting-edge nanomaterials. So why not just rebuild the missing 50-meter-tall pillars?
Ah.
Why leave the southern flank looking like a half-destroyed ruin?
It's the most natural question to ask, really. But the answer strikes at the very heart of the Italian philosophy of restoration. Rebuilding those pillars entirely would be an act of what architectural historians call mimicry.
Meaning faking it to trick the eye.
Precisely. If you build a brand new pillar in 2026 and artificially weather the stone to make it look like it was built in 80 CE, you aren't honoring the past.
You're just building a set.
Yeah, you're turning a sacred historical site into a theme park reconstruction. You are erasing the very real, very important history of the earthquakes and the medieval spoliation.
Because those events actually happened. The destruction is a fundamental chapter in the Colosseum story.
Exactly. The documents emphasize that the goal wasn't reconstruction, but spatial reintegration.
Right.
They wanted to restore the spatial awareness of the original building without building a fake building.
And because they absolutely refused to fake the past, the designers had to invent an entirely new visual language to show the Colosseum's geometry.
Which brings us back to that brilliant analytical review by Simona Cochi. She outlines 3 interpretive keys to understanding this project.
Yes, and the first key relies on a foundational theory established by a man named Cesare Brandi.
Brandi published his theory of restoration in 1963, and it basically became the constitution for Italian conservation.
His core principle is fascinating. He argued that any modern intervention on a historical monument must be instantly recognizable as contemporary, but it must do so without disturbing the visual unity of the original work.
His mandate is strict. You do not rebuild. You abstract.
Which leads directly into Cochi's first interpretive key, the floor as archive.
Right. Boeri and Dona didn't just pour a concrete walkway over the newly excavated dirt. They laid down a massive 3,130 square meter radial pavement that acts as a, well, Cochi calls it a stratified memory device.
And the material they used is so deeply poetic. They used classic travertine sourced from the Cava del Barco in Tivoli.
Which is the exact same quarry system the ancient Roman engineers used to cut the original stones for the Colosseum 2 millennia ago.
But to obey Brandi's rule of abstraction, making sure the new work is recognizable as contemporary, they cut the stone in flat, precise geometric layers.
Yeah, they ensured a chromatic continuity with the ancient ruins so the colors blend naturally, but they deliberately avoided any attempt to make the new stone look old or weathered.
Cochi points out that this new travertine floor allows the visitor to navigate 3 temporal registers simultaneously.
Yes.
First, there's the past. The geometric radial lines of the new slabs exactly mirror the ancient Roman architectural grid. It maps out the ghost of the building beneath your feet.
Second, there's the present. The modern visitor physically walking over this space, finally experiencing the true vertical proportions.
And third, the future. The entire intervention was built on the principle of full reversibility.
That reversibility is crucial. The architects designed the new floor so that it simply rests gracefully on the ancient footprint.
So, if future generations develop even better conservation techniques in 100 years, all of this modern travertine and lime can be lifted away without leaving a single scratch on the original Roman foundations.
It's incredibly respectful. Which brings us to Cochi's second interpretive key, the gap as aesthetic value.
Right, because if you aren't allowed to build fake 50-meter pillars to fill the empty sky, what do you do with the massive absence left by the medieval scavengers?
You inhabit the absence rather than trying to fill it.
Boeri's team designed 44 extruded travertine elements to do just that.
Relying on meticulous geometric methodologies developed by scholars like Trevisan and Goulven, they mapped the exact mathematical placement of where the massive ancient pillars used to stand.
And then they placed these new elements on those exact spots. But the brilliant twist is that these new elements are only 40 centimeters high.
They're basically just over a foot tall. It's such a restrained, subtle move.
I was trying to visualize how this works conceptually, and I thought of a natural history museum.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, imagine you go to see a massive T-Rex skeleton, but it's missing a femur. A bat museum would sculpt a fake bone out of plaster, paint it brown, and trick you into thinking it's real.
Right, the mimicry.
Exactly.
Eh,
But a great museum takes a delicate, modern steel wireframe and shapes it to outline exactly where the bone used to be. It shows you the geometry of the missing piece without ever pretending to be the real bone.
That analogy perfectly captures the aesthetic of the gap. Those 44 travertine elements act as the wireframe.
They inhabit the gap.
Yeah, applying Brandy's principle of contemporary recognition while honoring the visual unity of the ruin.
And they didn't stop at the pillars either. They even recreated the lost navigational systems of the amphitheater. Yes. Originally, the Colosseum had Roman numerals carved high up on the entrance arches to help ancient spectators find their seating sections.
Exactly like the gate numbers hanging over the entrances of a modern stadium.
But because the southern arches collapsed, those numbers were lost forever in this section of the monument.
So how do you restore a navigational system when the walls that held the signs no longer exist?
You carve them into the floor. The designers reinstated the arch numbering by engraving 40-centimeter-high Roman numerals directly onto massive travertine slabs.
These slabs are 120 by 60 centimeters, right?
Yep, and they laid them flat on the pavement, exactly aligned with where the ancient entrances would have stood. You are quite literally walking over the ghost of the ancient seating chart.
They also ensured that the raw mechanical history of the building remained visible. Between arches 65 and 71, the designers left a permanent archaeological window.
I love this detail so much. You could walk right up to the new floor and look down into a meticulously preserved cut in the earth.
They excavated straight down to the preparation layers laid during the reign of Emperor Vespasian in the 1st century.
By leaving this window open, they exposed the original hydraulic sewer system that ran beneath the monument to drain the arena.
Which provides the perfect logical bridge to Cochi's third and final interpretive key, public space as a cultural act.
Because all this theoretical geometry, the perfectly sourced Tivoli travertine, the abstract 40-centimeter extrusions, none of it exists in a vacuum.
No, it ultimately serves the human beings interacting with it today.
For a very long time, the Colosseum has been treated like a 3D romantic painting. It was an untouchable object.
Right, you stand on the outside, you marvel at the scale, you take your photograph, and you leave.
But this 2026 intervention completely shatters that paradigm.
By lowering the floor to its true level and placing those extruded elements, the southern flank ceases to be merely a monument observed from the outside.
It becomes a genuinely inhabited civic threshold.
Exactly. The new wide ambulatories are designed as functional public spaces. Families can actually sit down on those 40-centimeter travertine extrusions, resting in the shade of the ruin while they wait to enter.
The space transitions from a dead zone into a living, breathing square right in the heart of Rome.
And here is the most satisfying practical payoff of this high-minded cultural act. The modern piazza, the area with the 19th-century cobblestones, suffered from terrible rainwater drainage problems.
Oh, right, the ground was constantly pooling with water.
Always. But when Boeri's team excavated the dirt and lowered the piazza by a full meter to reconnect it with the ancient crepidine, the stepped base, it completely fixed the drainage problem.
That is amazing.
By simply returning the ground to the exact slopes and angles designed by the ancient Roman engineers 2 millennia ago, the water naturally drains perfectly. The ancient geometry literally solved a 2026 urban planning headache.
It's a stunning reminder that the original builders truly understood their environment.
And it positions this specific intervention within a much larger global debate about heritage conservation. Cochi's review contrasts this deeply Italian approach with other massive international projects.
Like Norman Foster's high-tech glass canopy over the courtyard of the British Museum.
Right, or Kingakuma's delicate timber interventions in historical Japanese sites.
The Anglo-Saxon or Northern European approach often leans heavily toward either total preservation, treating a ruin like an insect trapped in amber, or hyper-modern contrast, where the new architecture aggressively asserts itself against the old.
But the Italian tradition, tracing from Cesare Brandi's mid-century theories right through to Stefano Boeri today, is entirely about conversation.
The new architecture doesn't shout over the old.
And it certainly doesn't try to impersonate it. It just sits quietly alongside it.
Those 3,130 square meters of new travertine provide the necessary structural and visual context to let the ancient stones tell their own story without ever interrupting them.
It's a masterclass in restraint.
Let's summarize the journey we've just taken. We started with a 150-year-old architectural cover-up, where well-meaning 19th century restorers buried the true proportions of the world's most famous amphitheater under a meter of dirt and cobblestones.
Then we explored how a modern team of archaeologists, architects, and material scientists spent years digging down to the historical truth.
Utilizing revolutionary nanotechnology to protect the fragile travertine.
And finally, we saw how a masterful 2026 design refused to fake history.
By relying on abstract geometry and the aesthetic of the gap, they transformed a massive historical void into a living civic threshold.
It really forces us to reconsider our relationship with time and destruction, doesn't it?
It definitely does.
We look at the Colosseum and we see the gaps left by earthquakes and people scavenging for stone. And we celebrate the Italian designers of 2026 for finding a profound way to honor those gaps without hiding them.
Yeah.
But think about the world we are building right now. Think about the towering glass and steel structures of our modern cities, the skyscrapers, the transit hubs, the sprawling monuments of today.
Right. What happens to them?
Exactly. If our cities become ruins in 2,000 years, how will future generations mark our gaps? When our glass shatters and our steel beams rust away, will our descendants try to build fake theme park versions of our buildings?
Or will they possess the wisdom and the restraint to find a way to let our absences speak, just as Italian design did for the Colosseum?
It's something to think about next time you walk past a construction site or a modern monument.
This review has been researched, analyzed, and produced by Simona Cochi, digital journalist and producer from The Italian Way, an expert in the field of digital valorization of arts, design, and fashion events and collections, who curated and authored the contents of this review.